Hi there. I am Jay Laney. I run application engineering at Yammer, and this is Gadi Benzvi, our director of product. And for those of you that don't know or have wandered into the wrong session, Yammer is a social communication tool for companies, and it started in 2008 and it was acquired by Microsoft in 2012. Yammer has this belief that because of the technological changes in recent years, information spreads that much more quickly in the outside world, and we believe that workplace communication and collaboration have to change as a result. So in this talk, we're going to talk about how we think the nature of work is changing and why we feel that we can address these new needs with Yammer, the product. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that, but I want to try and set the context for you for how the product needs that we've had over the years have translated to a product engineering organization, and where we try and learn and iterate as quickly as possible, and why we feel it's good for our customers. Got it?
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about how we organize in product, how we think about innovation in the product org in Yammer. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Yammer sees the world and builds its product. And it's really important for me to go through that a little bit because it sets the context to how we organize. How we organize and the product that we're trying to build are very intertwined. So throughout this week, I'm sure you've heard a lot that the world is changing, everything is different and scary and big. And we didn't really discuss, though, at least in sessions that I've heard, the why. So what we're seeing right now is that the speed of information is changing. It's getting much faster. And when you learn something new, you change, you adapt. Because we're constantly learning new information at this point, we're just adapting faster. We're changing faster. And that's what you hear in other sessions when people say things like, the world is a giant network. Now, in our personal lives, what's happened is we've gone through this revolution in communication. All these new products that are coming out, the way we talk to each other, it's completely different. Our expectations from each other are different. The tools we use are different. The way that we organize is different, and we've seen it. We've seen in recent years that these communication tools have fueled revolutions. We've seen now that in natural disasters, the whole world can align together really quickly around a problem. And that's so different. That's really strange when you think about it from a perspective of 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But the thing that's fueling these changes are, in our opinion, two things. The first one is there's a lack of structure in your personal life. No one in your personal life tells you exactly how to organize, how to align, and what structure you should talk to each other. And that lack of structure creates a lot of freedom to try different things. Which leads us to the second point, which is there's a very low cost right now for experimentation. Now this is fueled a lot, excuse me. This is fueled a lot by the technology and improvements that have happened. To spin up a company now is really easy and try a new idea. So before Facebook had its success, there was Friendster out there that did a very similar thing, but failed. But the cost was pretty low. And over time, companies have realized that they don't actually have to put their entire business model behind one idea. There's a way to experiment inside your company without throwing away the company. Now, when you think about it, this change hasn't really stopped. You see companies continuing to push the envelope constantly in the consumer space. You see that companies are coming up with sharing to smaller contexts, like WhatsApp with a $17 billion valuation. You see exploding content with Snapchat. You see this semi-anonymous identity with Reddit. You see anonymous identity with Secret. Now, obviously not all these ideas are going to succeed, and Secret just went bankrupt the other week. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't stop the innovation that's happening in the consumer space, because you can experiment, because there's no structure. Now, this is in stark contrast to what's happening in businesses. Businesses already had a structure. They already had this rigid, well, a little bit of an echo. So businesses already had this structure in place. They were rigid. They were built for efficiency around a predictable goal. And the problem was that this isn't the way that people actually work. And it doesn't fit in line with the expectations that we have from our personal lives when you look inside the company. So let's say I'm in a company now, and you see here a diagram of an org chart. So when I'm in a company, and I want to get an answer. So I have a question that I want to get an answer to, and I know someone out there in the company has that answer. Do you hear that?
I do.
Okay. I thought it was just me. So you're trying to get to an answer, and it's somewhere in your company, but you don't know who has the answer. So what you do is you go up the org chart, you ask your boss, who asks his boss, who asks that boss, and it goes all the way across until maybe it goes down the other end of the company and you get the answer. But also the incentives that we've created in companies is to hoard information, is not to share. That turns you into an indispensable asset to the company. And when you look at that, and when you think about that in contrast to what's happening in our personal lives, where we work as that network, where information travels really quickly, that going up and down the chain and hoping that somehow you'll get an answer is just such a hard experience for us in companies. It's just so hard to deal with. So companies are basically having a hard time keeping up with two things. One is the expectation of employees. The expectation is that the way I work in my personal life, the way I organize, the way I talk to people should be reflective in the company. But more importantly, the companies aren't meeting customer needs. And the companies that do manage to meet customer needs, and you can think about it in fashion, are getting ahead. So again, in fashion, think of H&M, think of Zara. These are companies that can go from an idea to the retail floor within a few weeks, and they're getting a competitive advantage on their opponent. They're wildly successful because of that. So overall, what we're seeing now in the world is that there's this change from efficiency, companies built around efficiency on old information, to responsiveness to new information. We're seeing this shift from planning to experimentation, from control to empowerment, from secrecy to transparency. Now, none of this is really new. Managerial theories have been saying that this is the shift that businesses need to go through for the last 20, 25 years. What's happened, though, is because the pace of change in the world has accelerated, the need for change inside companies has accelerated as well. So it's much more of an urgent requirement. Now, a lot of companies want to adopt this model. The problem was that there weren't any business tools out there that could support this. And this is where Yammer came in. Yammer was the tool for the responsive organization, for the organization that wants to make this leap to responsiveness. So I'll go over very briefly what Yammer is. Yammer is an enterprise social network. What we're trying to do is we want to engage and empower all employees, and we want to make companies more open and connected. The reason we want to do that is we believe that employees that are more connected to the goals of their company and to each other are going to work better, are going to do their jobs better, are going to be recognized for it. And companies that are more open are inherently better. They're going to move faster, and they're going to make better decisions. So as we think about building Yammer, the product, one of the core things that matters for Yammer, and it also is reflective in our org structure and how we design for innovation, is that adoption is key. Adoption is key. So there are mainly two reasons that we think that this is really important. The first one is for companies. As you see in the first quote from Reed's Law, the value of a social network is exponential with the number of people in it, the size of the network. But unlocking that exponential value only happens if people actually adopt the product. Otherwise, it's just out there. And as we see the trends today that are happening, the tolerance for bad product is as low as it's ever been. You can see the trend of bringing your own device to work, bringing your own product to work. People will not accept anything less than what they're getting in the consumer space, what they're getting in their personal lives. Now, the second reason it's important for us to focus on adoption is for Yammer. Without companies' adoption, without companies getting any value, any ROI from Yammer, it'll be just one more failed tool, and people wouldn't use Yammer, people wouldn't buy Yammer. Now, there's a second benefit for adoption for us. It's a way for us to measure that we're actually having an impact in the things that we're doing. That we're actually making a difference in the world, we're making a difference to companies. Because otherwise, why would we be doing this? Why would we get up in the morning and go to work? So we talked very briefly about what's happening in the world and how we're thinking about Yammer, the product. And that's really important because we believe that this change is the right change. It's going to make companies better, the move towards responsiveness. And we're trying to build an organization on exact same principles. Now, as we built Yammer, we used to say all the time that we wouldn't have been able to build Yammer without using Yammer, the tool, because it allowed us to have that kind of responsiveness and openness and transparency that you would require from work for the type of industry we're in. I think John Welsh,
Jack Welch.
Jack Welch. You don't know John? Jack Welch put it really well to summarize this notion that if the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And we believe in that. So then the question becomes, how do we become more responsive as a company, as an organization? What principles do we use? So the way we think about it is we're going to start off with the assumption that the reason engineering exists is to build products, to improve product. And the reason we scale engineering is so that we can build product faster. That puts a top-level emphasis for us on the highest velocity possible. Now, when you think about it, though, velocity doesn't really matter if it's not aimed in the right direction. So we have to think about this in terms of value, and not just in terms of velocity. And then lastly, what we really care about is sustained velocity. It's not a short-term velocity spurt that we want. We want this to happen over time. So one of the key factors there is we want to attract good talent, and we want to be able to keep that good talent happy. So in this talk, we're going to focus on those first two things. We're going to focus on velocity, and we're going to focus on value. If you're interested in motivation, I would recommend Daniel Pink's book, Drive. We talk a lot about the principles that came out of that book and the aggregation of research that he did, and we try to apply those. It's a book about motivation in a creative nature, when the work is non-predictable. And as we all know, the non-routine work for all of us is becoming the majority of our work, and it's becoming the majority of the work for everyone. So, to talk about velocity and value and think about how to measure those, let's start off with an example. Imagine for a second that I was better with the remote. No. Imagine that it's 400 years ago. You're on a sailboat. You're on a ship. You're sailing somewhere. Now, it's 400 years ago, so there's no GPS, there's no radio, there's nothing. It's just you and the stars. Now, if you were trying to get somewhere, how often would you look up at the stars and course correct? Would you do it every 10 minutes, or would you do it every day? Well, that's a silly question, because why would you wait a day to course correct? Why would you risk going in the wrong direction for a day and losing that day, or possibly losing 2 days if you're going in the opposite direction? You would try to course correct as often as possible. Now, sometimes, though, the fog is going to roll in. It's going to rain. You're not going to be able to look up and see the stars. So what you start doing is you start making assumptions. And you might be making assumptions for a very long time on where you're going. Now, you might get to your destination, but most likely you won't. And the chances of you accidentally discovering America are dwarfed by the chances of you getting shipwrecked. Now, why do I bring up this example of a ship? Because this is the way software used to happen. We used to take the software, we used to put it on CDs, we put all of our assumptions into that CDs, we shipped them out, and we hoped for the best. And we didn't know what was going to happen. So that kind of brings up the question of, what if we could test our assumptions? So for that, let's imagine that we can for a second. How would we design this? Well, we'd probably want to know that we're building the product right, but we'd also want to know that we're building the right products. And we'd want to measure ourselves and course correct as often as our business is able to react to that change, to take action. Now, in the cloud, we actually can. We can build iteratively. We can ship close to continuously. We can test our assumptions, and we can measure the impact that we're having on our entire user base. And that's crazy. If you think about software from 5, 10 years ago, this wasn't possible. So this is a true revolution. Now, you might ask, well, all of that is fine, but why can't you do that when you release a product once a year? Well, the problem is that if you release a product once a year, you're actually probably building it for 3 years. You're probably planning for a year, and then you're actually building it for a year, and then you're testing it for a year, and it's out there, and it takes a while for you to get all the insights and all the learnings. But because it takes 3 years to build, and we actually want to ship every year, you've already started that other cycle, and actually another one. So you finished planning one, you finished building another. For you to actually bring any kind of insights to the next version, you're 3 years out from shipping anything to your customers. And that's not being responsive enough. That doesn't fit with people's expectations anymore. So what you really want to do is have shorter cycles so you can get more course correction. Now, I'm going to go back for a second to that ship example. And that example is actually kind of deceiving. Because when you're on a ship and you're going somewhere, you know where you're going. And that destination is static. That destination is predictable. Software is not. Software is dynamic by nature. It's ever-changing. If it wasn't, then the operating system that we're all using would have been MS-DOS still. So with this abundance of information that we're getting, we're seeing this change in user preference. But much more importantly is we're able to internalize the actual user preference and not what we thought the user preference was a cycle ago or 2 cycles ago. And we can react faster. And the idea that we wouldn't change our course, that we would just hold steady to whatever the old concept was of what we should be building with that old information is ridiculous. It just seems like a foolish thought. We're just leaving value on the table. So this is an example of the target moving and how course correction works. You can see that basically both arrows are trying to go to where the target is at any given moment. The question is who's going to get closer. And what we see is because we can ship in shorter cycles, we can get a better picture of what we should be shipping, what the customer really wants. We can adjust course, and inevitably we're going to be able to build the right products. And as you see in this illustration, we're much closer in the shorter iterations to the actual target. Now, there's another benefit to shorter cycles I want to talk about just for a couple minutes. Let's imagine for a second that we're all clairvoyant. Every single assumption that we have is right. Everything that we ship is the exact right feature. Even in that world, we would still want to have shorter cycles. And this is why. When you release a version to your customers, that's when you're providing value. Now, if you're able to release versions sooner or parts of the version sooner, then you're already starting to give them that value over time. Now, if you think that the transactional costs of a version are low, and in software they should be very low, that means that the value that you're overall going to be providing over time is going to be higher with shorter cycles. So you can look at this picture of a drawing on a whiteboard. You can see here that over time, that's the axis on the bottom, and the customer value is the axis on the left. You can see here that over time, the red line, you have some kind of baseline value that you're providing, and then at some point there's a big jump. With the blue line, you're seeing that the value is coming in incrementally. We have these short steps on the way. And if you notice in this diagram, the blue line and the red line meet at the point of value, actually a little bit further down. So the red line, the big release, is providing that end value sooner. That's the transactional cost, that little bit of a difference. But again, in software, the transactional cost is very low. So it's easy to see here, whatever's below the diagram is the value that you're providing, and it's easy to see that the value that you're providing is higher with shorter cycles, with more releases. Okay, so let's go back now to the real world. We're not clairvoyant, and we actually do need to course correct. So how do we know that we're actually on the right path? Well, the way that we do this is we take a problem that we're trying to solve. We take a goal. And then we think about all of our assumptions about that goal, and we turn those into hypotheses. Then we think of an approach that would test that hypothesis and a way to measure it. And then we run an experiment. When we run the experiment, we're actually getting feedback from across our entire user base, and not just the vocal minority. So we're actually getting a really good representation of what's happening in the real world. Now, this might seem a little bit complex, so let's just walk through an example. This is something that we actually tested a while ago. This is Yammer's sign-up flow. Our sign-up flow is a 4-step process. The first step is gathering personal information, so your profile information, the name, your password, department. The second part is finding the people that are relevant to you. The third step is finding the groups that are relevant to you. And the fourth step is uploading a photo. Now, we looked at the sign-up flow and we thought, can we help get users through the sign-up flow? Can we make it easier to them to convert on this whole funnel and get to the actual product? Well, maybe the fewer steps, the better. They'll have one less point of friction. And then they're going to get through the sign-up flow and actually reach Yammer, the product. So what we did was we took that last step, we took the profile picture step, and we put it into the first step together with the rest of the personal information, your profile information. And we thought, okay, now we're going to have less friction, more people are going to get through this, see the products. So if conversion is up, does this mean we were successful? Well, the answer is not necessarily. And to understand this for a second, let's take a step back and talk about key metrics and how they're related to the value your business is trying to provide. Now, in the example I just talked about, we said, let's change the conversion of the funnel, and then we remove the step, and then we change the conversion of the funnel, and what we saw was that the metric that we used to judge this feature was feature dependent. It was a local metric, what we call. I'll give it another example of a local metric that's even easier to understand. Let's imagine I go to Yammer and I add a button. And then my metric is how many people click the button. People click the button, success. But it's obvious that if you put a button on a screen, someone is going to click it. And if you're trying to maximize clicks on a button, you're going to start making it bigger and bigger and bigger until it takes over the entire screen. And then you'll make it big and red, and you'll write in capital letters, don't touch this button, and everybody's going to click the button. So we won, right? No, I mean, this obviously is a bad experience of Yammer. We just made a button instead of an entire product. So the first thing to think about is we're really trying to help optimize the product and not optimize a single feature. That means that our key metrics have to be dependent on the product goals. They have to be stable over time. And they have to be stable over time. We don't change the product goals all the time. Your company doesn't change its direction every day, every week, every feature. It's stable for a very long time. In Yammer, we've actually had for pretty much since the beginning 3 core metrics that we talked about. It's virality, engagement, and monetization. And those have been extremely stable. The only thing that's shifted over time is our prioritization of the 3 and which one we care about more. But it was always about these metrics. There's something to promote this kind of thinking that we do in the company is we tell everyone in engineering and in product, you don't just own the feature that you're working on. You own the product as a whole. That aligns the incentives correctly. So people, if they build something and it doesn't ship, they don't feel bad. Because what they're really trying to do is maximize the product, not whatever little thing that they're building at that given moment. So let's go back for a second to that example I just mentioned from the sign-up flow, and let's go through this right. So here's a sign-up flow, again, and the first question is, I'm going to stand over here for a bit. The first question is, what's the goal of the sign-up flow? Well, the goal of the sign-up flow is to set up users for long-term engagement in Yammer. So what's the hypothesis we have? Well, the hypothesis we have here is in the sign-up flow, if we increase the conversion on that flow and allow people to see the product sooner, they're going to understand what the value of Yammer is, they're going to be more likely to come back to it and be long-term users of Yammer. So what's the approach we're taking? The approach is, let's cut one step and see what happens. The core metric now isn't about the conversion on the funnel. The core metric here is about long-term engagement in Yammer. Have we moved that? Are people that go through a 3-step process more likely to use Yammer over time? And in this case, and then the ultimate question after the experiment is, did we prove or disprove the hypothesis? And in this case, we disproved the hypothesis. We were wrong. What happened was people did get through the sign-up flow faster, conversion went up, but less people had a photo in there. And when people didn't have a photo in there, other people were less likely to engage with them, and then they didn't come back to Yammer. So basically what happened was we were wrong. And you'll be wrong often if you go with this methodology. And that is completely okay. It's completely fine to be wrong. You actually can avoid it. What you can do is you can soften those consequences. And that's why we have analytics. Analytics let us know when we're wrong, and it let us know that we're wrong early on in the process, when the cost of recovery is as low as possible. Now, I can't iterate this point enough. Being wrong is not failing. Failing is the lack of learning. Failing is the lack of applying previous learning to current situations. And here you can see, sorry, Jay. Here you can see a few quotes from thought leaders in the world about this kind of methodology of iterative design. And you can see basically that they're saying people are wrong. You're going to be wrong all the time. You can't avoid it. There are very few exceptions to these rules. I actually personally go to our analytics team periodically and ask them the question, how often are we wrong? And when they tell me a number that seems too low, a percent that seems too low, I start getting worried. I start getting worried because it means that we're not pushing far enough. It means that we're not being ambitious enough. It means that we're not maximizing our learnings. It means that we're ultimately not building the best product for our users and for companies that we could have been building. So to kind of summarize the development methodology, the way that we think about it is we're trying to have rapid, iterative, data-informed development. So we want to be data-informed so we can question our assumptions that we talked about before. We want to be iterative so we can break those assumptions up and test them while we're going towards our larger goal. And we want to be rapid so we can do it often. This cycle, it's called the build, measure, learn cycle. And the way we just talked about it in practicality is we have a hypothesis. We define metrics of how we're going to test that hypothesis and an approach. We then run an experiment, and we take the results, and we take the learnings out of them, and we create a new hypothesis. So this is what's happening constantly in products. There's a quote that I really love from the previous or former head of Shell Oil Company's Planning Strategic Group, that the only sustainable source of competitive advantage in any industry is the ability to learn faster than your competitors. And this is really reflective of that responsiveness that we were talking about the learning org that we're trying to build in products. Now, when I give this talk, there are usually two questions that come up. The first one is, what about product vision? Well, product vision is key. Product vision is the thing that tells us towards what we're building, towards what goal we're actually trying to drive the company. Product vision is the conviction that there's a better product out there that we could be delivering to our users, to companies. Product vision is what allows us to escape the local maximum problem. So to describe the local maximum problem, I'll go through an example. Imagine for a second that I take you in a helicopter, and we're going somewhere, you don't know where. I put blindfolds on you, and I tell you, I'm going to put you in a hilly area. I want you to leave your blindfolds on, but get to the highest hill in this entire area. Well, what would you do at that point? Well, you would likely just take a step forward, and then think what just happened. If you just went downhill in a decline, you're going to take a step back and try going in a different direction. If you moved up as a result of that step, you're going to keep going until you hit a point where any way, in any direction you walk, you're going to be going downhill. Now, if you do that, did you just find the highest point on this entire area, the highest hill? No. What you found is the highest point on the particular hill that I left you on. So that's the local maximum problem. Without vision, you couldn't see that there's a bigger hill out there, that there's something else for you to scale. Now, this is also why we talk about being data-informed and not data-driven. When you think of being data-driven, it means that data is making the decisions for you. There's a famous example, or bad example from Google. They tested 41 shades of blue. They couldn't decide between these two shades, and they decided, let's test those two, and every single shade of blue in the middle, and see what the best shade of blue is for our product. That's local optimization. What if green would have been a better color? What if this entire question doesn't matter? Because they're just spending time on some minute detail of local optimization, when in fact there's a much bigger problem that they could be tackling, that they could be spending their time on. So we want to be data informed. We want data to help guide our decisions, not make our decisions for us. We want data to support our overall product goal. Now, the second question I get asked is, how do we prioritize in this world? Well, here there's really no secret sauce. We do it pretty much like any other software company does, only with two differences. The first one is we use data to help us prioritize. And the second one is we try to invalidate our assumptions as early as possible when the cost of going down that path is low. So I'll walk through the slide a little bit. So when we try to figure out a problem that we should be solving, a goal, the input comes really from everywhere. It comes from our customers, it comes from users, it comes from site visits, it comes from research sessions, it comes from the field, from observations, and it comes from our actual product vision. Now, we take those and we try to validate the size of the opportunity. We use data for that. So if somebody tells us, I have a problem uploading videos when they're longer than 2 minutes to Yammer on mobile, well, I might say, yeah, that's a problem. It actually doesn't work that well. But what's the size of the opportunity? How often does somebody try to upload that or take a video of 2 minutes in general? Is this really worth our time compared to everything else? So after we've tried to size the opportunity of it, we try to explore different hypotheses, potential approaches, potential solutions, and then we try to invalidate them at that point, even before we build anything, to say maybe there's nothing here. After that, we try to figure out the implementation costs and the expected benefits. So it's basically just a basic cost-benefit kind of breakdown. And again, we try to use data as much as possible. And at that point, we take all the approaches for that specific problem, we take that and we compare them to each other, and we compare them also to all the other problems we could be solving instead of this one problem. And we decide, are we going to build A or B or C? Now, it is important to note that some features, when they go through this entire prioritization, for example, security features, we're not then going to run an A/B test. We're not going to release a security feature that makes security better for only some of our users. That doesn't make sense. What would be the metric there? I mean, we know that security is just a baseline. It's table stakes. It's something we need to do. So the process of how we prioritize happens for everything. Some of those testing things for certain types of improvements don't really make sense, and we want to really test things that are going to be actionable for us, not test things just to say that we test things. Okay, so I walked you through a little bit about what Yammer the product is and how we organize in our product organization, and now Jay's going to talk about how we develop.
Yeah, how do we put this stuff into practice? We want to be able to build an engineering organization that has this build, measure, learn cycle built into it. Gotti talked a little bit about how being in a services organization, not having to ship software, is enabled us to be able to test our assumptions really quickly. But I can't underline this enough as far as actual engineering work goes. We no longer have to release to manufacturing. We no longer have to print floppies or CDs. Yammer has the luxury of never actually having to have lived in this world. We build server-side products, so for us there is no done. We are able to release as often as we want to. I mentioned this because, I mean, hell, when I first started at Yammer, we were deploying once a week, and I felt that that was really fast. But as we grew, that actually became a slowdown thing. Like, we were trying to build too much into one release. We now have been able to speed it up, where instead of this thing where you have to go into a terminal, it's a push-button thing in a web browser, and we deploy twice daily for most of our services. Our mobile applications are updated multiple times a month. So this does this. I mention it because it's changed my product and software development habits. I am able to have a very small delta between my development environment and production. It's really, really nice. It's freed me up for a lot. That's one advantage we have. The second is this. Conway's Law, which first showed up in 1968. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structure of these organizations. What does that mean? It's a sociological observation. When groups of people are building software, the structure of that software is going to reflect the structure of the organization that they are working in. I'm trying to think, an example of this, there's a classic example where Eric S. Raymond says, it's a siloed example. If 4 groups of people are building a compiler, you're going to end up with a 4-stage compiler where you don't necessarily need to. And this applies not just to software, it applies really to any organization or company. If at your company, HR and payroll are not working super well together, and they can't cut paychecks on time or something like that, I'm sure that the structures that they have in place to get their jobs done probably need a little bit of work. And I believe that it's not the people at these companies, right? Like, it's the structures that we put in place at companies that help determine the outcomes of work. For us, when we're doing our jobs right, I feel like we've actually managed to turn this into a strength. We knew a couple of years ago that we needed an org that allowed us to iterate on the product quickly. So in order for our product to be fluid, our teams had to be fluid as well. Yammer does have an org chart, though. We have not completely lost our minds. Not yet, anyway. It's different than other organizations I've worked in. You won't see something like having a standing files reporting team with a reporting structure or a standing search team. Part of the reason that we do this is I don't want to have to reorg part of the company if we aren't working on files for a while. I don't want to have to reorg part of the company to reflect that. We instead are organized by expertise, which does change over time, but it changes much more slowly, we found. For us, it's sort of what you would expect. It's server backend people and front-end people and mobile developers and quality engineers, PM, design, analytics, it's all that stuff. These teams are charged with developing deep expertise in their, they're stewards of their code bases, and they are charged with maintaining quality and thinking about where their code bases are heading in relation to the product goals. Work does not happen in this org chart, though. What we do is we take everyone required to complete a project. When we have a goal in mind that we need to iterate on, we take everyone required, and you'll have teams of like 2 front-end developers, a back-end engineer, a quality engineer, and a PM working together. It's all based on need. The goal with these teams, when they form, is for them to be completely decentralized. These decentralized teams are supposed to be completely autonomous. The idea here is that a team working on, say, sign-up has way more context and expertise to be able to make the decisions, way more context than Gotti or I, because we are trying to see the entire field. So we want all of the experts required to make decisions for that project on that project. Each project has a tech lead, which is something I will get to in a little bit. And the representatives are charged with representing their domain. We're trying to push the decisions out, to be as close to the work as possible. These teams, the way that they work is they think about what is required for success. This is the measurement aspect of that build, measure, learn cycle. Product and analytics think a lot about the metrics for each thing, for each project. And this is actually from a Yammer spec similar to that sign-up project that we talked about earlier. The metrics are there not to determine what we build, but to drive discussions and decisions on the team as they figure out what they're going to build. And it's also worth noting that these specs they're not like 40-page Word documents, right? We're talking, they start off with some notes and they start out with screenshots of possible designs. These are living documents that the team updates as they make decisions. We're trying to get to the core of the idea because each time we iterate on a feature, we want the minimum viable version for what we need to improve the product, but also to learn and iterate from there. We do this in a couple of different ways to be able to ensure that this cycle happens in a regular cadence. Scoping-wise, we scope these projects to last from between 2 and 10 weeks. And I say scoping, like it's a scoping constraint. This is not a deadline. We're there to figure out the scope of what we're going to build. And we bake this in for a couple of different reasons. On one side, we want to prevent ourselves from making too many assumptions and over-investing in a bad idea. If Gotti has a bad idea, and he will have many of them, we want to know about that as quickly as possible. And on the other side, we also want to prevent ourselves from overbuilding a feature to diminishing returns. If we launch something and it's super successful, but we spent 6 months building it, we want to be able to figure out what in there made it successful. So, and it also helps generate urgency on the team, right? Like urgency on a 2-month project is a little bit more easy when you're in week 4 compared to if you are in week 4 of a 6-month to a year project. I also found this when I was working as an actual engineer in this sort of system. I found it really engaging. I was building things and taking stock of the results and my own performance and moving on to something new. It was sort of like starting a new job every 10 weeks. It was really exciting. In addition to the scoping of time, we also limit it on the size of people. We limit our projects to 2 to 10 engineers. And there's a judgment call in this. We believe that if the entire team can sit around the table, they're not going to require a whole lot of process or communications overhead to get their jobs done. There's not going to be design review after engineering review. We want to get the agreement costs to be really low. We also feel that projects that are longer or have a ton more people on them have this integration cost that happens at the end of a project, and in my experience, it goes up non-linearly as the larger a project, and we want to reduce that churn size as things go on. So, returning to the little boxy projects we have from earlier, as projects are finishing up, what they do is they are rolling off and being staffed on new projects. So, think about this, right? Like every 10 weeks, you get exposed to a new feature, a new part of the code. This rotational aspect has been really nice for us. Each project has a couple of different deliverables. They're responsible for moving metrics, but they also have some other things. They talk about, they talk about what they learned on their project. This is the build, measure, this is the learn section of that build, measure, learn cycle. The learnings help inform the projects that are spinning up at the time what they learned, so we're able to influence the next projects with what we learned. We're going to know new things that we didn't know 2 to 10 weeks ago. It's also, it's good for feedback as well. People are regularly taking stock of how the projects are running, their own performance, and if there are organizational or technical blockers that happen inside the projects, it's sort of we'll take an opportunity to figure out what we want to do next. We've actually staffed projects to improve deploy speed or any number of things because of what happens. And this also gives us a lot of different eyeballs across our infrastructure, as our teams are striving to develop practices to reduce spin-up time as they move from piece to piece. Inside of these projects, another thing that we're trying to do is, and this sort of like people question this a lot, we want every engineer to only be working on one project at a time. Part of this is, at previous gigs, I would be decently productive as I spun up in my first project and somewhat productive on my second, and then my productivity would just drop because I would be supporting the bugs that I had created in previous projects or supporting the org knowledge that I had as a result. And this would happen for me and my coworkers as project after project, our productivity would slowly just spin down. And the only way that I would be able to get out from that mountain was either to stop creating bugs, which is never going to happen, or move to a different job. So, we don't do that. We're trying to create a system of focus and accountability because engineers are focused on their current project. Inside these teams, when an engineer knows that their coworkers are focused, it prevents this collision that happens where I'm an engineer, I give a coworker an estimate, but I'm also have these commitments to other projects, and as a result, that estimate ends up being completely inaccurate, and churn happens. They're also making better decisions in my mind because they're not context switching between a bunch of different projects. Now, this got us into a lot of trouble when we started trying to do this because there's also this Yammer product that exists and is serving customers all the time. So to help enable that focus, we've had to create this support engineering team that is exactly what it sounds like. It always exists, but it doesn't always have the same people on it. It is a rotational thing that people rotate through as they are going in and out of current projects. Everyone rotates through it, senior engineers, junior engineers, people that are just starting out. And this has been helpful because it's helpful for feedback. I was starting projects and launching new things, and then I would return to my code 4 months later so I could get to see how poorly or how good it had performed while it was in production. And I would bring those learnings about my own performance and architecture decisions into my next project. The other thing that we're doing is, with all of these decentralized projects running at any given time, we're trying to avoid having this Gotti or I chasing after each project, trying to figure out how well they're running and helping, making sure that they're making decisions. Instead of the traditional engineering management aspect of all of this, there is a tech lead inside of each project, and this is a role, not a rank. This is the engineer on the project designated to be responsible for organizing execution and ensuring engineering success. They're also sort of the focal point for collaboration between engineering and product. This roll ladder rank thing has been really nice for us. It gives every engineer a chance at Yammer to step back from the code and do the sort of traditional engineering management aspects of task delegation and making sure that people are working at a decent pace. Everyone that we hire at Yammer, we expect to be capable of being a tech lead, and everyone gets a chance at doing it. And it sort of helps, right? Like, it's nice to see the world open up for people getting their first tech lead turn. They are suddenly dealing with more context than just their lines of code. They have to think about business goals and the full context. With all of these projects running, the way that we keep track of them is something that we affectionately call the big board. It is, for a very long time, it was exactly what you see here. It was a whole bunch of markers and magnets with people's names on it listing projects. It has recently transitioned to being a digital version, but I sort of have some nostalgia for this one. It's intended to provide transparency into what we're building. In our organization and now and actually across the rest of Microsoft, I find that it's really important for anyone to be able to view the big board and have the same level of understanding of what we find important at any level of the org. And because we're also using Yammer, you can dig deeper than that. You can walk up to the big board or load it up in a web browser, see an active project, and because we're using Yammer, you can dig deeper than that and go to their project group and ask them questions or see what they're working on in real time. For us, there's been a big plus here using Yammer. It's created a lot of candor in our culture. Everyone is working really, really hard, but people have gotten really good at being honest about their performance and talking about it and figuring out what they're going to do better in the future and what they did wrong. It's been really nice. So that's a really, really, really quick tour of our cross-functional model. It sounds very simple when I say it like this. It's cross-functional teams that are autonomous, 2 to 10 people, 2 to 10 weeks, an assigned tech lead, a product manager working closely together. One project per person, and a big board to make all the staffing and priorities transparent. I am presenting this to you as if it's a complete model, but this is something that we had to, in fits and starts and a lot of arguments, move towards over many years. It has our values of delivering customer value while maintaining velocity and employee empowerment baked into it in a lot of ways, right? Like, engineering is trying to move this great big rock that is the product. We're trying to improve it. And Gotti said earlier that the reason engineering grows is to improve the product faster, which is not exactly a novel observation. It's a variation on why a lot of companies grow. We realized with a lot of mistakes that you couldn't add velocity when you're growing by adding people unless you decentralize decision making. This process is our best effort at breaking up that rock and being able to move quickly. And we've learned a lot of weird lessons along the way. Decentralization requires a lot of trust, which is something that we had to figure out over time. It's changed our thoughts on hiring in a lot of ways. Coding skills alone are not enough to be effective in an organization like this. You have to be able to reason about the rest of the product and explain that reasoning in a coherent fashion to others. And true to Conway's Law, it has also informed the way we build our architecture. Our server architecture is meant to be iterated on by small autonomous teams, so we don't have this, we've had to move away from this giant monolithic code base that is basically just all of Yammer at one time. Each of the highlighted rectangles that you see is powered by a different service, and together, when we're doing our jobs well, they all power all of Yammer. And this means that teams aren't stepping on each other's toes as they're doing work. The services are meant to be understood with a minimum of ramp-up time. So this has allowed us to grow from a product and engineering team of 30 to over 140 in 3 different continents and 2 different countries. And we're still iterating on this. It's we have to we come up with new bottlenecks and new weirdness all the time. One thing that developed over the last year and a half-ish is with over 100 engineers rolling between projects at any given time. This is that rotational aspect that I showed you earlier. Project assignment itself actually became a bottleneck. With so many people freeing up every week, this was a very, very weird time for Gotti and myself. Most of our job became just figuring out who was going to work on what next. And we became a bottleneck. Getting the assignments done in time introduced a delay for starting new projects. It also became sort of difficult for us to judge our top-level priorities. You can imagine that when your project list is a length of 10, that's generally pretty easy to figure out what you find important, but when it grows to 40 or 60, that's not a list of priorities, right? Like it's just a collection of stuff. So we are experimenting with the idea of initiatives. These are mini Yammers of 15 to 25 people, and we give them larger goals. External messaging, or grow files usage, or grow mobile usage and engagement. We are thinking that 3 to 9 months is the length for them right now. That's about as often as our big priorities change, but it's something that we're experimenting with a lot. And it also allows product engineers and managers more long-term ownership and deep expertise in something as our product has gotten larger and we've started integrating with the rest of Office. And that is pretty much it for us, actually. This learning organization idea that we're circling around, we honestly believe that it's created a better organization at Yammer, a better place to work, and it's allowed us to deliver a better product for our customers. And if this interests you, please come talk to us. Part of the reasons that we do this talk is to learn from other people and how they're approaching this process. And this list here that you see is sort of what Gadi and I were thinking about as things we've learned over time that's sort of like our nice hacks for success. Test your assumptions as often as you can, and I would highly encourage you to try the crazy and negative ideas too. We've had A/B tests that teams seriously disagreed about where half the team thought it was crazy and half the team was really convinced of it. And in order to prove it to themselves, instead of just canceling the project, they launched the A/B test as a way to prove each other wrong. We've also tried weirdly negative ideas. We have before spinning up some recent performance work, we actually tried just slowing Yammer down for a certain portion of our customers to figure out the impact of what improved performance would be like and figure out how big the opportunity was.
So Jay just walked through the key takeaways that were for Yammer, but those are really company specific. So as you leave here, there are two things that we want you to take home with you, to take back to your companies. The first one is think about your company. If you feel disempowered by the lack of autonomy, if you feel like the cost of agreement in your company is too high, think about Conway's Law. The processes in place and the structure that you created are probably the things to blame. It's not the people. If people live in silos, they are going to create siloed solutions. So help your organizations. Create a structure that will help people spend time on the activities that create the most value for the least cost. And focus on maximizing learnings and on how you can react to them. The second thing we want you to take is this. We've been describing this focus on the customer usage, on engagement, on the value that we're providing. At some point, all software is going to be developed in this way. If we expect business software to react as quickly as consumer software, if we expect business software to be as good as consumer software, companies will have to adopt this methodology. There's no other way. This is the best practice in the industry. This is the reason that consumer companies are on the cutting edge and have been moving faster. Instead of a focus on these feature metrics, we're seeing a focus on usage. Instead of a focus on the newest version, you have services like the Office 365 suite, which are always up to date. So when you go and evaluate software choices, don't just ask the vendors what features they have and what's available today. Ask them how they develop. Ask them about their direction. And how do they know that they're building the right things? Ask them how they validate their assumptions and how they measure themselves. These are really important questions to ask because, as we discussed, user needs evolve over time. And with the pace of change that's happening now, they're evolving quicker. The product solutions that you get are ephemeral. What you need to do is you need to find products that will continuously evolve with you.
That's it.
And with that, we'll take questions.
Yeah. I'm going to show up the Yammer resources thing.
Oh. This thing?
Yeah, I know it's early, but if it is, anyone is waking up to think of a question, we'll happily take them. Hi.
Hi. I'm wondering, how does Yammer estimate how long something will take for engineering? That's something I'm on another Microsoft team we struggle with it as well.
Okay. You want to go with this?
How engineering estimates how long something will take?
I mean, basically, like we know our cadence, right? Like it's we know the cadence at which we're able to develop this 2 to 10 thing developed as a judgment call based off of how we were seeing how quickly things got out. At times we've tried quicker cadences, at times things ran so long. So when we make a spec, when we write a spec, product and engineering are trying to think, we think that this can take 2 to 10 weeks. But it's also possible that we're wrong. And so over time, as we make more specs and we've launched more products, that's how we've been able to say, oh, you know what, this is probably outside the scope. We will do this on a follow-up iteration. It's sort of it's just a constant, it's another piece of iteration that we have to do.
So y'all estimate things in weeks then?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, I mean, like we don't like Gotti and I talk to each other more often than like just up here on this stage. We will walk around with half-completed specs and say, how long do you think that this piece of thing would take? Yeah, so there's a lot of like casual. We'll post on Yammer. We'll say this spec is half finished. What do you think about it? Sort of stuff.
Yeah, we actually created a Yammer spec review group. That was one of the experiments we did. And every half-baked spec that we had, we posted there, and we said, can somebody look at this? And then just someone from engineering would pick it up and say, yeah, the part that I need to work on seems reasonable. We'll let the team figure out if it's 8 weeks or 2 weeks, but this seems reasonable. So basically, you have to talk to engineering early and not finish an entire huge spec and then say, like, how long will this take? But have them involved in the conversation as early as possible.
And because of the fact that it's a relatively quick cadence, I'm also okay if a project decides that something is really important and ends up running 14 weeks, right? Like we don't get super bogged down in the like making sure that like we don't take people's computers away once they get to week 10. Yeah. So I'm tempted to now that I think of it.
Hey, Gotti, it's Melanie.
Oh, hey, how's it going?
You knew you'd hear from me. First off, awesome presentation. I love how your passion for this process shines through, and it's really helped me a lot.
Awesome, thank you.
This is something where I wanted to just let you speak freely without hearing from me again, for a change, on the problem of the power user. I mean, essentially, I understand that the value in your model is that you're designing for the 90, not for the 9s or for us who are the 1s. Now, your most passionate champions or your community managers or your network owners, we tend to be the 9s and the 1s, and when you design for the 90, we show up in your customer network and we yell at you about our needs, whether it's our investment in social metadata and topicking, and yet we know we're atypical. You've convinced us. I mean, we know we're atypical, and what we want is atypical, and the way we interact with the UI is atypical. Can you just tell us about how we should be thinking about this, or how we fit in your model, or where we fit into your world?
Yeah. I think the approach we take is we look at the power users and we look at the edges of what's happening. So first of all, if you have input, it's really important for us to hear from you. So we take that and we try to validate it. Now, it's not that we're trying to just validate it across our entire user base and kind of get to the lowest common denominator feature. Sometimes we'll build things that we know are not good for the 100% of the users, but they're really good for 10% of the users. And what we think is, based on the trajectory of the product, based on the focus areas that we have, that more users are going to move in that direction. In some cases, we say, what you want is really a one-off. You're reflective of the 0.1%, and that's not the direction that the product is going to head in. And we don't think that this is going to be, at any point in the future, something that's really representative of the entire user base. So there's a lot of judgment in that process, but it is, just to reiterate the first point, really important for us to hear from you and to hear that there's a problem with Yammer, and when you have 300 things in your inbox, it's unbearable. That's really important feedback for us. So that helps us drive our decisions. Does that answer the question?
It does. It kind of, is it fair to summarize as saying, hey, if you're that power user who we think is a leading edge indicator of greater behavior to come, then we're likely to be something that you would design for. However, if our use case is just super specific and narrow, it's just not likely to be an engineering priority.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that we work at Yammer, so we are usually Yammer power users, and so we feel your pain a lot of the times. We're trying to build a pyramid of networks with more messages so that we can also then be able to design for people that have more messages in their inbox, that sort of thing. It's a pyramid that we're trying to build. We want more people at the top. Shaky pyramid.
Yeah, with deploying and developing so fast, I'm curious how you guys ensure the quality of what you put into your end product.
Yeah, a ton of we have over time tried to develop more and more tools for this. I do like the idea that any engineer at Yammer can deploy code as whenever they need to. But we also do plenty of things. It's a lot of automated tests, a lot of integration tests. We have engineers that we don't even mandate code reviews, but we do we had this idea of no mandated code reviews, but we still have this grassroots movement of people doing pull requests and figuring out how to get themselves to be better. Our build information is our tests are integrated into Yammer, so if a test fails, it yells at a developer. It's all that sort of thing. We also use things we will also monitor production for new issues. So it's it's all the sort of expected stuff. What you're saying, the ensuring quality leads into a lot of the ways in which we try and improve our tools. If deploys are slowing down, and as a result, the developers sort of give up and can't get their code out, so they just leave for the day, and as a result, something goes bad, right? We try and speed up deploys. If the tests are taking too long, we try and speed up the tests. If the quality of the test is testing things that aren't actually really going wrong, we look at that. We generally also rotate through an engineering backlog of projects to sort of ease that for developers, by making better dev environments and all that sort of thing. Yeah, the teams themselves, right? These functional teams that we were talking about, they have their goal when they come together and talk about what's going on in their different projects is to ensure quality. So engineers keep each other accountable, and we keep the managers accountable as well. Yeah.
And there's one more factor there. Aside from all the things that we put in place to ensure the initial quality, we also think about the mean time to recovery. So the cost of us, obviously we do everything to ensure quality, but if we made a mistake, it's really cheap for us to go and fix it.
Yeah.
Because of the way that we've organized our services, because of the fact that we deploy multiple times a day. There was an example just a couple weeks ago. We have an embed, and something was wrong in it. It just looked awful as a result of a change that we made. And we got notice of it, and within 24 hours, we already had a fix out. So that part of the system is kind of built so we can recover quickly and not just you have to get everything at 100%. If you get it at 99%, maybe that's fine because the 0.1%, as long as it's not security issues or things like that, you can recover quickly.
Thank you.
Hi. You mentioned you're moving away from the physical big board that you're using to manage your project. What tool did you move towards? We
built a big board thing that is. I actually don't know if it's open source. I think it's open source, and I could try and find a link to send you. But it is basically a version of that thing that we had. And we're also trying to figure out, as we move to this initiative model, where a lot of the assignment is happening more locally, what do we do with that? Do we have other smaller physical big boards around the office, or what? So it's sort of an open question. But right now, it is just this other tool that we ended up building. Yeah, it was a Hack Day project. Yeah, no problem.
You mentioned the quick development cycles and so on in Yammer, but how do you see that integrating? Because it's part of the Office 365 suite. So how do you see that integrating with the traditional Microsoft development?
Yeah, Microsoft is also in this process adopting some of this, right? They're because of the fact that we are we're able to deploy different portions of Office 365 when we need to. I honestly, and this is not because I don't feel that this is because we've managed to figure all this stuff out and we're perfect, right? We're actually really terrible at a lot of our jobs. The pace of development at Microsoft is speeding up, right? We are no longer doing these giant 3-year cycles for SharePoint and everything like that, right? Office 365 itself is moving to a quicker pace. So we do have teams that inside of Microsoft have adopted not necessarily a 2 to 10 scoping model, but are doing cross-functional teams and moving people around. And as we work with them, that's sort of the model that we see working. We will have PMs assigned from both organizations and engineers assigned from both organizations working together. That's what I'd like to see, but it's sort of figuring out how to mesh all of this stuff. It's been a lot of our job over the last couple of years, honestly.
Thanks.
Yeah. How's it going?
So I've worked for 2 software companies, and now I work in an IT oil company, IT department. Mm-hmm. We've implemented something kind of similar to this, and we do try to be iterative. Our hindrance is actually the business. They want to see, the complete spec, everything, 100%, get it all signed off. So as you guys give this talk, have you actually worked with anyone who's trying to make this work in a traditional IT organization?
Our IT itself is also going through a thing where they're working with traditional Microsoft IT, but and has run into some of the same issues. I think that I think the Microsoft IT itself is probably less traditional than what you're talking about. I feel for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I guess I don't know. The only and this is free advice. The only thing that I would really say is point out the delta between what you thought you were going to build at the beginning and the delta of what you actually end up building. And there's probably a decent that probably ends up differing as you build stuff. And I'm guessing that you have to go through a bunch of reviews as the spec changes and things get really weird.
Yeah, they expect you to understand what it is 100% up front.
Yeah.
That delta isn't allowed.
Yeah, they are expecting you to be absolutely perfect. That's really rough. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
It's a really hard structure. I think if you don't have business support for it, then it becomes very, very hard. There's a huge paradigm shift when you think about this learning organization. The idea that we called it the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. The hippo doesn't get their way.
Yeah.
So it's a huge problem, but ultimately you need to show over time that this is providing better results. It is a really hard thing. Moving to learning organizations is really hard. I think there were some interesting notions there in Lean Startup around how to move your company towards this model. So,
yeah, getting used to being wrong is a strange thing because even I will have to stifle my reaction of when something gets discovered in week 7. I'm like, how the hell did you not know? But people we have almost institutionalized that being wrong is okay.
Data helps.
Yeah.
Data really helps because that first time when you had 100% conviction that something's going to happen and it didn't, it adds a ton of humility to the process at all levels. So if you can measure the fact that a project that ran for a very long time and it was very clear exactly what you were going to do and you stayed true to that course and you did it and then it didn't do anything, then that person starts to question their own assumptions. And that's, I think, how we've also created better engineering and better PMs with data that informed instincts afterwards. Good luck.
Hi. I liked your stars analogy a lot, and I was wondering, so if it takes 4 weeks to put something out, then you have to collect the data, and then you have to get enough to be statistically significant, and that's quite a long process. Do you ever do, focus groups beforehand with kind of mock-ups or charts, and also how do you recruit users so that you don't have self-select bias?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually didn't touch on that at all. We do also use those methodologies. So for example, now Yammer is really evolving its focus from the entire company to a group kind of context. And with that, we're creating a lot of mocks, and we're putting them in front of users as early as possible. We have a research team. And what they do is people can opt in. Actually, I think as part of the terms of use, maybe everyone is opted in to us contacting them about user research once. So what we do is we kind of try to take a random assignment of our user base and ask them about something. Or if we released a feature and we know that it wasn't successful, or sometimes we know that it was successful, but we're not sure why, we would contact people that used it. And again, a random selection of those people, and we would ask them, how often did you use it? What did you think about it? Why did you use it? So we do also use those more traditional methods to try to get feedback as early as possible. The idea is just to invalidate the assumptions as early as possible. And you're right, sometimes an A/B test is not going to be the best way to do it. Sometimes you're going to do something that is very hard to have an A/B test on because it's on new users, because it's on some kind of behavioral change.
And so you said in product, you'll pop something to the users sometimes?
No, we've actually talked about building that. What?
Yeah, we haven't tried that yet.
We haven't. We didn't like the tools that existed out there. We were going to build our own thing. But then again, we went to that prioritization and we said, what's really the value of popping it in there versus emailing them afterwards? So the value is that that's in context. And then the question is, does the feature actually require that feedback in context, or is it something that somebody can answer later? And we found that in most cases, it was something that people could answer later. I agree with you. We would probably get a higher conversion rate on replies to those surveys if we put it in product. Now, there's a general problem with this, and this is why we do like to A/B test as much as possible. There's a selection bias there. the people that tend to respond to these surveys are kind of a certain archetype of person. And that's where we start getting the vocal minority answering our questions instead of people that are representative. So we kind of take everything with a grain of salt when we do that kind of research, and we just say directionally, here's more input for you, and that's part of the data-informed part of it.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so.
Thank you, everyone, for.
Thank you so much.
Another
Yeah,
no.
Oh,
Yes,
hi.
another
So,
question.
quick question. Your development model, is it reliant on co-location? I know we're talking about Yammer here, and it's all about connecting
Is
organizations.
it qualification?
Co-location. You're talking about
Interesting
rapid.
question. So we have a London office, we have a Redmond office, we have a San Francisco office. What we have tried to do is we basically have the teams that are working on a problem together be co-located. So as an example, Redmond and London have different product initiatives that they're running than San Francisco. So right now, yes, we are optimizing for people being around each other. Granted, like we have a product that allows people to communicate really well, so there are times where people are working remotely or something like that. But yeah, right now, for the most part, we are focusing on the three areas of gravity of those three offices. We have tried doing projects that are across time zones and everything like that. It's really hard. So we focus mostly on sharing learnings at the expertise level right now. Yeah.
So we're quite a large company. We're 70,000 strong in terms of our active users. Our IT is about 1,500.
Yeah.
Globally dispersed.
Right.
So our key challenge there is how do you utilize a tool like Yammer to try and get that kind of digital agile team.
Yeah, I hear
so
you.
it would be really great to figure out how you can do that.
Yeah. We use, the Yammer groups are usually, you will see a lot of handoff happen when it comes to expertise. So so London will post before they go to bed about the things that they've learned in the day, and San Francisco will respond. We do the very occasional joint team meeting, but it is a lot of just as making sure that things get written down has been incredibly helpful for us, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah, the cross-functional thing is, the cross-geo thing has been working better when it's in the same time zone.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with London and San Francisco or London and Redmond is that people are just awake in completely different hours. So then it's really hard to do anything real time. And we use Yammer for that. Then when it's in the same time zone, I think it's been working a little bit better. We use Yammer, we've used a lot of Skype. In a lot of projects, they actually have an always-on machine. So there's everybody's sitting together in a cubicle area or like an open space around the table. They put a machine on, and then anybody that's remote can just listen into the conversation and jump in whenever. That's actually been proved for us pretty useful.
A decent travel budget also helps. We fly people around a lot. One of our London PMs is here trying to stay awake.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. How's it going?
Hi there. I was just going to ask about the dynamic software. I get the approach. So you're moving in a fast direction and making it available for customers. But sometimes some of the things like MySpace, it dies and you offer some features. And today they're great, but later on down the line they're dead. Would you take them away, or how would you offer that?
Go for it.
Feature deprecation?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we could be better about this. But what we do is we create a list of features that we think aren't valuable anymore, and we periodically go back to that list. That list is generated by engineering when they say there's a lot of complexity here. Again, we want to have sustained velocity, so anything that slows us down, they would put it on that list. And they would say, even if it's the most important feature in Yammer, they would tell us, there's a problem here, we either need to fix it or kill this thing. Design would do the same thing. As we're redesigning, they'll say that these elements are confusing, it's not clean enough, it's not simple, the flow doesn't work. So they would put things on the list, and product would put things on the list where we think it doesn't add value. We take that list and we do the same prioritization exercise, and we come up with the top things. And then we have another thing, aside from engineering support, we have a product support group. And what they do is they do all the things that don't fall into initiative models. One of them is killing features. So basically we kill things that are going to help us move faster or reduce the cognitive overhead for users. And that's our main criteria.
So you guys would decide on how that would be run?
Yeah.
Your product team, basically.
Sorry, what?
Your product team will decide on how if they're going to kill the feature.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of an example of something that we've killed someone recently, but nothing comes to mind. Yes, that's right. Yes, events. No one was using events. And it was a technical problem as well. Like our implementation was terrible.
True. Well, thank you everyone for attending, especially this early, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it's early.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.